Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
All right, it's Friday. That sort of sounded like an all about the business start today. All right, it's Friday. All right. It's Friday. Jesperson here with you. Hicks alongside it, the birthday boy. How was the birthday celebration last night, pal?
Good morning. It was great.
Cheers to you.
It was incredible.
Good morning to you as we raise our official Real Talk studio mugs to one another in a cheers, celebrating 5 weeks of great shows this week, and we celebrate you. Thanks for giving us your valuable free time. You know, there's nothing more valuable you can give us than your time, and that's why we are motivated every single morning to deliver content that you expect, the questions that you would ask if you were conducting the interviews, and that includes in just a few moments from right now. We're going to talk to Dr. Raj Sherman, a former MLA. He's the former progressive conservative MLA that became the Alberta Liberal leader. You remember, well, he wants to get back into politics. He's an ER doctor, and his campaign is driven by his conviction on what the province of Alberta needs on the medical front. So Dr. Raj Sherman will be joining us in just a few minutes. He's not guaranteed to be able to run. There's kind of this, there's this small print, John. He hasn't been a card-carrying member of the United Conservative Party for a minimum of 6 months, and you have to have a membership for a minimum of 6 months to run. But he says that his involvement with a certain health committee that requires him to be nonpartisan, in other words, you know, he can't have a political membership, or maybe shouldn't have a political party membership, precluded him from having a membership. He wants to run. Now, he dropped off a bunch of big checks the other day. He tweeted about it. He posted a photo. He's walking down with basically more than $100,000 in bank drafts for the United Conservative Party. He has no problem getting the money. He says he's got the signatures, so I'm looking forward to that conversation in just a moment. But as everybody knows, the Pope is on his way to Canada. He'll be touching down in a couple of different provinces, territories, you call it, Quebec, Alberta, including Treaty 6 territory, where he will be delivering an apology for the Catholic Church's role in residential schools. Now, we've been talking to several voices through this week, and that will continue today. It's the subject matter of our Real Talk Roundtable, and it's what we're going to get into with our leadoff guest this morning. Dr. Matthew Wildcat is an assistant professor in political science from the community of Gwich'in, a member of the Ermineskin Cree Nation near the site of the Ermineskin Indian Residential School. That's where the Pope will visit on July 25th, just 3 days from now. Dr. Wildcat contributed to an online series called Uncovered, Truths About Indian Residential Schools. We're grateful, Doctor, that you've been able to make time for us this morning. Welcome to the show.
Great. Thanks for having me.
How are you wrapping your mind around, or how are you preparing your heart for, or what has gone into you getting ready for this papal visit?
Yeah, you know, obviously there's a lot of mixed feelings out there from a number of people. You know, for myself, I have a lot of sympathy for both sides. I absolutely understand why people would be angry even about this visit. We don't know what will come of it, and in all likelihood, we can't expect an apology to to all of a sudden magically create a bunch of change, right? Like the action that has to follow from it needs to be driven by real people making real decisions, and we don't know what those will look like afterwards. At the same time, the reason why this apology has come about is because survivors called for it, right? And survivors called for it within the confines of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which traveled widely across Canada, hosted events in communities all over Canada, hosted regional and national events. And survivors said that for them to have a minimum level of dignity, and for them to have the ability to feel, this apology was required and necessary, right? And so I'm happy that survivors who have called for this get this opportunity to hear this apology on Monday. For myself, I'm going in with a blank slate. If there's anything, I just want to be reflective in that moment, and I want to be able to experience the energy and the feeling in the crowd and what's there. Because part of how I think of my role in attending is just bearing witness to the event. This is an event that will be something we talk about within the history of Gwich'in. And one of the things that makes us a community and makes us a nation also is that we have to narrate our sense of self, right? We have to create an identity of who we are as a peoples, right? And so for me, this is an event that is one of the ways in which we'll tell a story about ourselves moving into the future. And I want to be able to contribute to that collective understanding, right? From my own individual perspective, to join with other voices of people from the community who witnessed it and experienced it, to create that collective narration of who we are as a people.
Yeah, I appreciate that insight. And I appreciate your candid comments on the fact that a lot of people have really no time for this. And I would imagine that there's going to be a lot of feelings of anger. There's a lot of trauma that's going to be stirred up again on behalf of a lot of people for whom the Catholic imagery will take them back to the absolute worst point of their life, the most unimaginable circumstances. What's your message to those survivors? What are you telling people that you may have one-on-one or personal conversations with from your community? I mean, people whose lives were destroyed by residential schools.
Yeah, so this is an event that will necessarily cause a certain level of harm, right? Like at a certain level, it causes a bunch of stress already in the community. I know because a bunch of my family members are working on the logistics, and their week has been stressful. Even my week, actually, this is the fourth media appearance I've done this morning. It was a lot of extra work to be able to, discuss and give commentary and analysis on this situation. So it's something that it's required a lot of the community. And but at the end of the day, I think this is an act of generosity the community is providing for others, of being hosts, to provide that platform so Pope Francis can come and deliver the remarks that he has to deliver for survivors who have called for this, right? And so this is I think of it as a gift on our part, and I'm glad that we're able to offer this gift for survivors. For people who this is experience, this causes more harm, I have a lot of sympathy for that. And this event comes with continuing ripple effects of harm, right? Because it uncovers stuff, but also even if you didn't go to residential schools, when you learn about the history, there's a lot of anger that comes with that, right? And so it's completely reasonable that a lot of young Indigenous peoples are angry about this event too. But the way I think about it is, as Indigenous peoples, we have to grapple with the harms of colonialism every single day, all the time, right? We've developed all sorts of mechanisms for coping, for resilience, and responding to it, to go out and change society based on decades of activism. And so I think that I trust that for people who experience this as being a difficult event, that they have the resilience and capability to get through it in order to provide this space for survivors who have called for it, who think it's just like a minimum level of dignity, that the Pope is willing to admit that the church did harms, that they were wrong about a program which tried to convert Indigenous peoples into Christianity, that assimilate Indigenous peoples into Canada, so that Indigenous peoples would no longer exist in this country as legal and political entities, and that the church is sorry for it, right? That seems like just a basic, decent thing that you can do, and I think it's probably at the end of the day, he should be doing it, right? And I'm glad that we're able to provide that space for him to do it.
It sounds strange for me to say. I really like the spirit of your comments, because I know you're not auditioning for my approval, but it aligns with what we heard from Grand Chief George Arcand Jr. earlier this week, Grand Chief of the Confederacy of Treaty 6, and he said, basically, people can check out the highlights we put out or check out our archives, but he says this is a good first step. He says, and this is he was very clear in articulating that, right? He says and if the church, I'm paraphrasing, but if the church, indicates that it is willing to walk with us forward, then we can talk about what the relationship looks like or what healing looks like forward. But he was he was diplomatic, as a Grand Chief needs to be, certainly, with the political implications, but he was very clear to say this is the first step. What would a positive or productive or healing type relationship or partnership, or however you want to phrase it, coexistence, what would that look like, Matthew, to you, between Indigenous people in Canada? I mean, I'm not asking you to speak for millions of people, but between Indigenous people in this country and the Catholic Church?
So the Catholic Church has to live up to its commitments around, it committed $30 million or close to $30 million as part of their commitment towards the settlement agreement.
Right.
Sorry, the settlement agreement which produced the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and they haven't gone there, right? So that's probably just a basic minimum starter, is they follow up on the things that they've already agreed to. For me, I don't put a lot of stock in the apology. what I've told people is like at its most generous reading, we can expect probably two good things out of it. So like one, apologies from large institutions like churches, like governments, even corporate organizations. There's something which they're a phenomenon right today. And so we might be able to in the future look back and say, you know what, this like trend of apologies signaled something about the willingness of organizations to take more responsibility for how they've wielded their authority in coercive and abusive manners, right? And in corrupt manners, really way. And so we might say that it's leading to a larger responsibility of large scale institutions across the world. Is that going to happen? I don't have a lot of faith that will happen, but maybe in 20 years we look at these apologies and they are a signal that there was something changing in the way in which the world was operating, right? Like I said, I don't have any faith that will happen, but that's a generous reading of the situation. I think the second generous reading is that what this does is it establishes the bare minimum understanding, like common understanding of how we should think about the history of residential schools, right? And unfortunately, sometimes many people in Canada, but still people in the church think the talk about residential schools is overblown, that they weren't that bad, that they provided all sorts of goods to Indigenous peoples, and they'll go cherry pick a few Indigenous peoples here or there who say they have good experiences when we know the overwhelming amount of experience was awful and negative. People still go cherry pick Indigenous peoples who are, who just have a different perspective, and then try to represent their perspective that, the residential schools were okay, as being the perspective of all Indigenous peoples, and being unwilling to have a conversation, like a reasonable conversation in context, right? And so an apology like this can help people to pin others down and say, no, even the Pope said we committed grave harms against you and we're sorry for it. We did awful things and we apologize because we're really sorry that we should have never have done that. Right. And so, yes.
Well, no, I don't mean to cut you off. I just wanted to make the point that, as you're clearly making yourself, that this is not something where my uncle used to say at family picnics in the 80s that they weren't that bad. It's Chris Champion, handpicked by the Premier to direct the writing of Alberta's new curriculum, is the guy behind the Dorchester Review, which just in this past calendar year has insisted that kids were having great times at residential schools, and that archived photos of kids smiling on a jungle gym playground setup is proof somehow that there wasn't abuse happening at the institutions. So this pushback against residential schools being taken seriously is not something from the 70s or 80s that we need to dig up. It's still around us. And like you said, it's pretty damn impossible to ignore the fact that the Pope came to Canada to apologize for something that wasn't problematic.
Absolutely. Yeah. It sets that minimum common understanding, which will give leverage to people who want to pursue, whether we call it reconciliation, decolonization, creating a good relationship, however people describe their paths and their journeys that they're pursuing to change, the nature of this country. It gives people some leverage on that front. So as a generous reading again.
Dr. Matthew Wildcat, I know you wanted to participate in our Real Talk Roundtable coming up in 20 minutes, but you're right. Everybody wants to talk to you today, and I know for a fact you got a presentation coming up at 9 o'clock. That'll be live Mountain Time. We were really lucky to be able to get you in ahead of time because I wanted to make sure we heard from you. Thank you for sharing your perspective today.
Absolutely. Good luck with the roundtable.
Yeah, thank you. That's Dr. Matthew Wildcat from the Department of Political Science, University of Alberta. If you go to their website, ualberta.ca, you're looking for the Prairie Indigenous Archaeology link, and that's where you can find, or it's probably easier if you just Google Uncovered, Truths About Indian Residential Schools. And you can find it. This is a project that Dr. Wildcat participated in. It's a 4-part web series that's designed to facilitate conversations highlighting the voices of experts, community members, faculty members, and you can check it out online again. Uncovered, Truths About Indian Residential Schools. Dr. Wildcat, an assistant professor in political science from the University of Alberta, initially from the community of Gwich'in, a member of Ermineskin Cree Nation. Before we get to Dr. Raj Sherman, he wants to be the next Premier of Alberta. He wants to lead Alberta's United Conservatives. I wanted to tell you about something very special going on this weekend. Now, we revealed to you yesterday that we're going to be working with this team. We are working with this team at Urban Timber to build the new interview table in our brand new studio, the one that we're opening up this fall. We're super excited about it. Nobody quite approaches design quite like Urban Timber. I mean, this team is incredibly talented. They've got an amazing reputation for working with reclaimed wood, but they're also making a ton of mid-century modern and contemporary furniture with a story. And that's what everybody loves about it. You run your hands along these tabletops, you wonder,
they're incredible.
How many hundreds of years has this wood been here on planet Earth? So their old store, everybody knows if you're local, if you live in Edmonton where we do on 104th, torn down. They're excited for the grand opening of Urban Timber Showroom 2.0 this Saturday from 10 to 4. Check out their website for more at urbantimber.ca. They've got summer cocktails and summer mocktails for all their guests. Sound the alarm. 15% off all selections on Saturday only, which is a big deal on some of these projects. These are high-value projects, a lot of them, so 15% off, well worth your time. And if you need any more reason to make it out this Saturday, proceeds from the dining tables they sell are going to go to the Alberta Alzheimer's Society. Love it! You can get all the details at urbantimber.ca. Did you double dilly yesterday for your birthday? You forgot to take him home!
You know what?
You forgot to take him home.
I triple dillied.
You tripled. Did you really? For real?
I did, yeah.
I love you.
I thought you were kidding around, and then I went to the freezer after work. I was like, oh my gosh.
You think I would joke around?
A box of 8?
You think I would joke around about giving you the dairy-free dilly bars for your birthday? Obviously not, pal.
Don't give me a box of 8.
You don't do that. You don't joke around about gifting somebody dilly bars. I picked up the dilly bars at the Dairy Queen in Westmount. That's kind of my home Dairy Queen. But you can also find your dilly bars, the dairy-free and the classic originals in Palisades, Nemeo, Newcastle, and if you're out in Sherwood Park on Baseline Road. And don't forget, they have their Summer Blizzard collection, too. I'm going to be honest with you, I had a late-night treat myself last night. Shook it up, went with the Buster Bar. Nice thing about the Buster Bars, when you get to the bottom of it, you get hit with more peanuts. Oh, yeah, baby. We're sure proud to partner with the team at Dairy Queen. Make sure you check out my feature blizzard, the drumstick with peanuts, for a limited time at the Dairy Queens of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park. And a huge shout out to our friends at Apex Automation. We've been putting out the word to engineers across the country this week. Apex is always hiring. They're driven by their people, and they're looking for the best engineers in Canada, not just the most skilled. Yeah, that comes with it, but they're looking for people that understand what it means to achieve great things in a team atmosphere and reach your full potential. They're providing intuitive, fully autonomous solutions that are making their customers, their clients, more efficient, more profitable, all the while working flexible hours, enjoying professional development opportunities, and of course a great corporate culture that includes maybe the best Christmas party in the city of Edmonton. You can learn more about your next career at Apex Automation by visiting apexautomation.ca. Our next guest is no stranger to political watchers in the province of Alberta. He served as a member of the Legislative Assembly and MLA for Edmonton Meadowlark, representing that riding as a progressive conservative, and then as leader of the Liberal Party. He took that party through the 2012 provincial election, resigning in January of 2015. Oh, yeah, and he's an emergency doc. He's an ER doc at the Royal Alexandra. Dr. Raj Sherman, our guest this morning. You want to be Alberta's next premier, but you're not sure if they're going to let you, Doctor. Can you bring us up to speed on where this story's at right now? I think we got you on mute, buddy. We'll just make sure we can hear your voice. There we go. I can hear you loud and clear, Doc.
Ryan, good morning. Thank you so much for having me on your show, and hello to everybody out there. Yeah, it's an interesting time in politics. I lived a lifetime in politics before, and it's time for Alberta to choose the next direction of the next premier of at least the UCP party on October 6th. Whoever succeeds in that leadership race is immediately Alberta's premier. And I would like Alberta to give me that opportunity to serve at the highest level.
Okay, so right now, the rule says that you've got to have a membership. You have to have had a membership for a minimum of 6 months to be able to seek the leadership. You've had yours for about 2 months, and so you're appealing to the party, essentially. I know you've been trying to build support. You've been talking to MLAs. Rumor is, maybe you can confirm that you've got some MLAs that have signed a document suggesting that you should be allowed to run, but what's the status as of this morning, as of today, Friday?
I gave them a big check. The entry fee is $150,000, and $75,000 was due on Wednesday at 5 p.m. I took in enough money, more than enough money, to enter the race. Now, we gave them as many memberships and nomination forms as possible. We don't have the exact count. I know we were very close. So the party's reviewing it, and we'll find out probably on Monday whether we made the cut or not.
I've spoken with you in past. As a matter of fact, full disclosure, people should know that our family, in an unfortunate circumstance, attended the ER at the Royal Alexandra Hospital several months ago, and you were the physician that gave us great care, and I'll always appreciate that. We have had a personal connection. We've known each other for many years, and you had managed to convince me, Raj, a few years ago that you were done with politics. You love your work in healthcare. Quite frankly, I think that you got banged around a little bit at the Alberta Legislature. What was it that drew you back in? Why do you want to do this?
All right. First of all, my intention initially was only to run for 4 years and get healthcare fixed up, at least on the way to getting fixed up. And yeah, it's like hockey sometimes. You go into the corner, and if you don't keep your chin and your head up, you might get hit, and that happened. Now, after 7 years of being out, what happened is COVID was a game changer. 2 years of COVID, the healthcare system is worse than it was when I first ran in 2008. And in fact, it's not just an Alberta problem. It's a Canada problem. It's a worldwide problem. People haven't had a checkup for 2 years, and we're diagnosing cancers in emergency because people haven't had a regular checkup a year and a half ago. They haven't had their regular screening. Diabetes is out of control. People are having heart attacks at a much younger age. The amount of chronic disease out there, mental health and addictions. The opioid crisis is something that's just plaguing our society right now. And I had to tell my children and my family. In fact, my children insisted. They said, Dad, you got to get back in there. My daughter's a family doctor. She said, Dad, healthcare is a mess. It's a crisis. And the system needs you. So please run. So I actually had the full support of my children and my mother. In fact, even my children's mother. So I'd like to give it the opportunity to serve. Now, to fix healthcare, it's not just healthcare. You want to fix healthcare, it's prevention. We got to put a school nurse and a mental health counselor in every school. Let's make sure, because our children, as soon as they turn 18, they're last in line for the healthcare system, and they can't get a family doctor. There's so many things that we have to fix in our problem that are broken. Our economy is good, but there's so many things that are broken that they need to be fixed, and COVID hasn't helped. And I think the number one issue for me is unity. We're divided as a people. Families are divided. Friends are divided because of their response to COVID. Rural and urban Alberta are divided. We have to bring people together. Alberta is such a wonderful place, and I think we're the best province to live in, but we can't do this. We're all in this together. So my number one issue is actually unity.
Do you think that it's possible to have that message resonate in a party like the United Conservative Party, where despite the insistence that it's a big tent, so-called small c conservatives have had to audition or try out to find favor with the party? In other words, hundreds of thousands of people have been told they're not conservative enough. Do you think your feet are nailed to the floor as the former leader of the Alberta Liberal Party? You think people are going to give you a chance?
Ryan, I'm the ever optimist. I always believe if you don't try, you won't get what you need to get. Now, before I entered, I went to rural Alberta. I broke bread with a whole bunch of northern rural MLAs and central MLAs. We discussed issues, and they said, hey, Raj, we'd love to have you back. In fact, as you know, I was a progressive conservative MLA.
Yeah.
I've always been fiscally progressive, socially conservative. My value system had never left, regardless of which political party I was in. As an independent member, I worked with Brian Mason in the NDP on stuff that made sense on the progressive side of the ledger. And I actually worked with Danielle Smith on economic issues when she was Wild Rose leader, and on stuff that made sense over there, and on managing money. In fact, I was in the stage. Danielle Smith invited me up. I was in the back of the room, and it was really heartwarming. She said, Doc, can you come up and talk to the folks? And I was honest. I said, look, I'm honored to be here. But I said, many years ago, we in the Conservative Party, we had a civil war. We ended up having, Brian Mason used to joke that this is fantastic. We have 4 Conservative parties because the leaders of the Wild Rose, the PCs, Mayor Mandel ended up becoming leader of the Alberta Party. Mm-hmm. and I was leader of the Alberta Liberals. We were the blue Liberals. We literally changed the color to blue and red because I think that's where most Albertans sit. People are fiscally responsible with their money, and they want good public services. They want good healthcare, good education. The seniors, we got to look after the seniors. The moral test of any government is how we deal with those who walk in the shadows of life. The homeless, the hungry, the handicapped, and those with mental health issues and the opioid crisis. Most people sit there, and those are the value systems I'm bringing to reflect in the UCP. Daniel Smith was more than happy to have me on the stage. And I said that we focus on what we didn't have in common back then. I said, now, people like me and Danielle, you may not agree with her on certain things, and I don't agree with Danielle on certain issues. But what I do agree, that we gotta fix the problems that ail our province. How we fix it? How you skin a cat? Yeah, there's different ways to skin a cat, but we all love this province. We all do. Even Premier Notley, she loves this province.
Even Premier Notley, Premier Notley loves it.
Yes,
we know Premier Notley loves the province. Everybody loves the province.
Hey, yeah, Rachel's wonderful. She's a dear friend of mine, and I have the utmost respect for former Premier Notley and for Premier Kenny. For anyone who occupies that position of Premier and leadership, it's a tough job.
Oh, we just showed a photo of you, and maybe you can provide for the majority of people hear this on the podcast, so I'll describe it. Raj, what year is this that you're at the lectern there at the legislature in the media room? Is that 2010 approximately?
It's either end of 2010 or it might be early 2011.
Yeah, okay, so I'll get you to tell the story, but you're here standing, I believe if memory serves correct, you're an independent at the time, standing here. You're with NDP leader Brian Mason, Alberta Party leader Sue Huff, Wild Rose Party leader Danielle Smith, correct? And David Swan, who at that time was leading the Alberta Liberals. Am I wrong?
Absolutely. So I was an independent member, and we were debating the Alberta Health Act. I proposed an amendment to legislate the strongest performance measures in healthcare wait times in the country, similar to what England had. That basically, if you go to ER, the principles were there should be no unnecessary waste in the system. There should be no unnecessary waits. There should be no unnecessary harm and no unnecessary deaths. That if you went to emergency, you got to be in and up in a hospital bed, admitted in 6 hours, or in and in your car back home in 6 hours, 19 times out of 20. They did this in the United Kingdom, and there's many good solutions from across the world. So the leader of every political party actually supported this, except the governing party at the time, the PCs who no longer exist. And we said, look, guys, how we get there, let's not discuss that. Let's discuss just getting there. And the Wild Rose might want some private solutions at that time. And the NDP and the Liberals wanted public solutions.
Are you open to private solutions?
Ryan, I'm open to fixing the public system. Before we throw the baby out with the bathwater, let's fix the public healthcare system. And it's this easy to fix. The issue is the moral authority of a government and the decision to actually fix problems. Let's get the seniors and those who are homeless out of hospitals that don't need to be there. So we actually have to restructure the Ministry of Health and Wellness. It should be the Ministry of Health, Seniors, and Community Supports. Whoever runs AHS cannot run AHS if you plug up the hospitals with 20% of people should not be there. That's what's causing the emergency waits and the EMS crisis. Secondly, we need some accountability. You can't manage what you don't measure. We have to report all the measurements on a web every 3 months, saying here's where it's succeeding, here's where we're failing.
What are you talking, like wait times and things like that?
Absolutely. Workers' absenteeism, staff morale. When the staff morale is 30%, who runs a business where staff morale is 30%? Frontline staff must be engaged and involved with healthcare. I would have frontline staff appraise their supervisors and let's clean house. We got layers of middle management. We got thousands of jobs in AHS right now that exist because things don't work well. Well, let's get things working well so we can redeploy the staff to frontline care.
Are you, because you've been out of the mix for a while, I mean, if you're walking around Edmonton, if you're walking around Calgary, everybody knows who Dr. Raj Sherman is, but I don't know at the doors. I'd be curious to know what your team has been discovering. is there a concern? I mean, it's certainly a challenge. I won't say it's unsurmountable, but is it a concern that you may be perceived, yes, as a former politician, yes, you're an entrepreneur on the side, we haven't even really talked about that, but you've done well in business, you've done well in building and infrastructure and construction, but you're an ER doc, and you're coming in and you're talking a lot about healthcare. Do you think people might perceive you to be, pardon the phrase, a bit of a one-trick pony? They're going to go, I need a guy that's going to be able to drive the economy, a guy that's talking about policy on curriculum, all the stuff that comes with provincial governance. Do you have to convince people you're more than, I can't believe I'm saying this, but more than just an ER doctor?
You know, it's funny. This isn't my first rodeo, Ryan. You know, back then, they used to call me the one-trick pony. I said, hey, guys, it's the biggest trick on the book in the country.
Sure.
We spend $250 billion a year in this country. And if you can't fix healthcare, if you don't have the solutions to healthcare, you can't govern. It's a number one expenditure issue. And I used to tell, all the presidents of the universities, said, if we don't produce more family doctors in Alberta and stop people from getting sick and getting hospitalized, healthcare is eating the lunch. In fact, it's working on dinner salad right now of every ministry. Now, as Liberal leader, I actually learned a lot. In fact, the MLAs were fantastic. Lori Blakeman, Hugh McDonald, Kevin Taft. I can't mention them all, but I had to learn about 20 different ministries as leader. They taught me a lot, and as leader, I had to be on top of 20 different files. And that's why in the 2012 election, the Calgary media folks said, I won the debate. It's because I don't need to read notes. I know what I'm talking about. And as leader, I talked to all the experts out there who ran education. I was in the boardrooms of all the oil companies. In fact, you know what? I never talked about it, but I paid my own way to Washington. I met all the top Democrats. I was in the State Department. On speed dial, I have the people that Joe Manchin was here. Yeah, I had a meeting with the Energy Committee. I had a meeting with Barbara Boxer and Bernie Sanders in Washington.
Don't tell the UCP you met with Bernie Sanders, pal. There's no way they're going to let you run in this race.
Well, you know what? You got to meet everybody. I'm sorry, the Democrats are in power in the U.S.
I agree with you, Raj. You've been talking about Danielle Smith. I want to ask you about this. I'm not sure if you saw my interview with her. It was a week ago yesterday. If people want to check our archives, it was the what was it, John? The 14th of July, I believe, the Thursday that we talked to her, right? And Raj, you mentioned Danielle Smith. She said something rather inflammatory on the show. I don't think it was an accident. We won't play the whole clip, but I want your response to it. She's talking about Dr. Verna Yu. This is Danielle Smith on Real Talk.
We have to challenge Alberta Health Services. They are either incompetent or they went out of their way to sabotage the UCP government. I watched the very first press conference that the Premier gave back in March or April, where he gave direct instruction to Alberta Health Services to increase the number of ICU beds by 1,089. And then I think everybody was going along thinking they were working on finding that surge capacity. Then when the Delta variant came along last fall, we found out that not only had they not increased ICU beds, they had decreased them.
And then she goes on, and I say, come on, you don't possibly believe that they were trying to sabotage the government. She says, I don't know any other way to take it. She says, Verna, you got fired a year before her contract was up. I don't know any other way to take it. You said you agree with Danielle on some things, you disagree on others. Where do you land on this one?
On this one, Danielle, and I'll have to respectfully disagree. That's why you need a frontline healthcare worker. It doesn't have to be me. Hey, if there was somebody else that wanted to run from healthcare, that'd be fantastic. I have educated everyone in public on Twitter. For everyone in ICU, their chance of death was about 50%. And if you didn't die, you were on a ventilator for 4 to 6 weeks. My daughter worked on a COVID ward, and she'd tell me, Dad, you got to get on the radio waves because people that should have gone to ICU can't go. We don't have the staff. We can get the machines and the beds and the equipment. We don't have the highly trained staff. And so if you had 1,000 people, for everyone in ICU, there were 4 people in a hospital bed sucking on oxygen, suffocating. So if you had 1,000 people in ICU, that would mean 4,000 people in acute care beds. That's 5,000 hospital beds. That's the whole acute care capacity of Edmonton and Calgary. And we were already running a system at 98%. So on this issue, when it came to, ensuring how we dealt with COVID, nobody wanted lockdowns. I didn't want lockdowns. I didn't want mandates. I don't think anybody wanted that. We live in a democratic free society. We need to decrease the spread of the virus. And if people got sick, the system needed to be there for you. But the reality is we are running a system at 98% capacity. And the day after the election, the former minister, he ripped up the contract and sort of went to war with all the doctors and nurses. So to my friends in the United Conservative Party, I said, guys, I'm not here because I love everything you did. I'm here because the system's wrecked.
Yeah.
And you know what? You were part of it, but COVID was a game changer. So it is what it is, Ryan. I don't like to live in the past, and I don't like to lay blame. I think there's a lot of solutions out there. And one of the main solutions, actually, we got to get family doctors in all of Alberta, especially rural Alberta. It's a major crisis. We got to start training our own homegrown family doctors. We got to invest in education, post-secondary. Let's make sure the doctors that are sitting there driving taxi cabs and working in cabinet shops, let's invest in their education, upgrade them. Let's get them serving our communities. These are doctors from elsewhere in the world. We have our own kids who are trained in Australia and Ireland and somewhere. Let's bring them back. Let's tell our kids are leaving because they don't trust the government. And I can see what the issues are. Let's tell our kids, hey, we're going to sign the contract with the doctors and all the healthcare unions. Healthcare workers literally put their lives on the line. I got COVID. I was so sick for a month pre-vaccine, and I had to take a month off.
Huh.
Look how many people died in Italy. How many doctors and nurses and respiratory therapists died in Italy. This was a horrible virus, So this is why I'm saying, guys, we got to get together. We're in this together.
I didn't see the numbers the other day. I should have known this. I saw it stacked up just the other day. Canada lost within 1,000 deaths, which is a lot, obviously. But Canada lost as many people to COVID as we did in World War II. I mean, I think that I haven't seen a lot of people talking about that. I think it's worth mentioning. I've got to go. I know you've got to go. So literally in 30 seconds, I'm just curious. You're an ER doc. You're right there. You got COVID at work. How do you feel about this AHS, this sort of reversal of policy, whatever you want to call it? They've lifted the blockade, so to speak. So if you're not vaccinated now and you work for Alberta Health Services, you can go back to work. How do you feel about it?
Vaccines do not reduce your chance of catching or spreading the virus. Vaccines reduce the likelihood of you getting severe disease. I'm happy supporting that policy. Yes, we want everyone to get vaccinated that wants to get vaccinated and who doesn't have any legitimate exemptions to it. We live in a free world. I think people should be allowed to make that choice, and we should make accommodations. However, in healthcare, we got to continue masking and wearing our gowns and wash our hands. And if you're sick, stay home. Don't infect your family and friends and loved ones. But really, if you really want healthcare fixed, I'm asking Albertans, please go to electraj.ca, sign up. We haven't changed our website. Our nomination page might still be up. It allows us to capture your email and contact you. The membership sales end on August 12th. If you don't buy a membership, if you can buy a membership before August 12th, you can vote in the democracy of the UCP leadership race, and whoever wins is immediately premier on October 6th. And guess what? They're charged with dealing what is an absolute mess right now in healthcare and in the homeless crisis. We got to fix the war with the teachers. We got to have the teachers have say in how we design our education system. We have to do a major investment in seniors community supports. And you know what? We need a strong economy and a strong society. So we have a big deficit on the society part of the ledger in Alberta. Yeah, economy is great. We balance the books, but you know what? People are suffering out there.
You're right.
And you need a leader who's compassionate, understands this. So electraj.ca.
Awesome.
Please help me help you.
Dr. Raj Sherman, I really appreciate your availability. It's nice to connect with you again, my man.
Ryan, thank you so much. And hey, congratulations to you and your lovely wife on that new baby that you have. And God bless you.
Thanks, Doctor.
God bless Alberta. Thank you, everybody.
I really appreciate that. That's Raj Sherman. You can check out electraj.ca. Let us know what you think. Talk at RyanJesperson.com. Very curious to see if the party is going to let him run on this. Like he said, he posted a photo of it just the other day, like a fistful of bank drafts. Well, there was only two of them. I'm being dramatic. But like he had one of the bank drafts for $100K, for a cool $100K. And then the other one I think was for $50. He's like, let's go. I'm ready to go. I've got the money. I'm getting the signatures. Let's go. We'll see if they'll let him run. That's Raj Sherman. We're going to get to our Real Talk Roundtable coming up. That's, as you can see, I'm very much looking forward to a conversation with Dr. Gail Fraser and Dr. Shawn Flynn that'll join us in just a moment. These conversations happen because of the support of amazing partners like Kubi Energy, who wants to remind you that no matter where you are in Canada, they're doing installations across Western Canada, BC, Alberta. They can head into Saskatchewan. They've got install teams ready to go. People are taking advantage of this federal government initiative, $40,000 available to homeowners as an interest-free loan to install solar and other energy-efficient measures. You can learn more on their blog at kubyenergy.ca. It's also where you can get your free quote. If you live in our neck of the woods, there's a $5,000 rebate from the federal government plus a $4,000 rebate from the city of Edmonton, which means that solar could be way closer, way more in the near future for you than you may have thought. If that cost barrier is out of the way, Kubi Energy can get you there with solar energy solutions to power your life. Now, once you got the solar panels installed, you're going to want to make sure by that time you've brought your electricity business over to Park Power, along with your internet and, of course, natural gas. Why? Because when your system produces more than your property needs, Park Power will buy back that electricity at a higher rate than the big guys will. Why? Because they're your friendly, local utilities provider. Plus, when you sign up with them, 10% of their electricity profits are going to nonprofits in the community. You get to choose which charity benefits. That's just one of the reasons why we love partnering with Park Power. Use the promo code 2022-RealTalk to get $70 knocked off your first bill at parkpower.ca. Now is a perfect time to check out Canada's online university, Athabasca University. Why now? Well, why wait to the fall to get a head start on your next journey, your next career opportunity? Prepare yourself with the world-class accredited online programs and courses at Athabasca U. But we're leaving on a road trip, but we're going camping, but I have my sister's wedding. Doesn't matter. You learn at your own pace. You're never going to fall behind. You're never going to miss an exam. If you have plenty of spare time on your hands, first of all, how'd you do it? Second of all, you can work ahead in your program. It's why so many people are choosing AU at athabascau.ca. Well, we've dedicated this week to hearing the voices that matter, the voices that have relevant perspective when it comes to conversations around the Catholic Church's apology for residential schools. You know by now that the Pope is visiting several Canadian jurisdictions, several jurisdictions across this country, including Treaty 6 right here in Alberta. It's a high-profile visit, and it's somewhat of a polarizing one, to say the least. And we appreciate the voices that have joined us over the past while, over this past week or so, to share not just where they're at, but where members of their community are at. And that includes these next two. Our Real Talk Roundtable this week, featuring Dr. Crystal Gail Fraser. She's part of the governing circle that guides the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation. Dr. Fraser is a professor in the Faculty of Native Studies in the Department of History, the University of Alberta, originally from the Northwest Territories. Gwichya Gwich'in, an intergenerational Indian residential school survivor. Dr. Shawn Flynn is the president of St. Joseph's College at the University of Alberta. He participated in the listening circles ahead of the Indigenous delegates' visit with the Pope in Rome at Vatican City earlier this year. To both of you, a very warm welcome. I want to encourage you, the spirit of these roundtables is a conversational one. Please don't wait for me to tap you on the shoulder. If you want to jump in, if you want to add to something that your panelist, your fellow panelist is saying, please feel free. Dr. Fraser, where are you at in preparing for the Pope's visit this weekend and into next week? How are you wrapping your mind around it? Where's your heart at?
Van Guinzi, good morning. Thank you for that question. I think this has been long anticipated. I think that there is a lot of excitement and energy around this visit, but I also think that we need to remember that this visit is actually rooted in decades of Indigenous activism that survivors and communities have been calling for this visit and apology for a very, very long time. And even though the visit has been framed in terms of reconciliation, in terms of advancing healing, we also have to remember that this would not have happened if it wasn't for the now thousands of unmarked graves that have been talked about in international media over the last 14 months, and the fact that we're now having conversations about genocide and Indian residential schooling histories and experiences.
Dr. Flynn, what is it? And I think maybe one of you have your speaker on or something like that. I'm hearing some echo back. If you could just kill your speakers, that's perfect. Thank you so much. Dr. Flynn, for people of the Catholic faith, There's obviously a lot to unpack here. There's a lot to get into. For you personally, what does this visit represent? What does the apology represent?
Yeah, I mean, for Catholics aren't going to be much different than the average Edmontonian, where some are highly engaged and some are less engaged, and some need to learn a lot. For myself, this has been a lot of learning, a lot of listening, a lot of trying to understand my responsibilities as a settler, my responsibilities as a lay Catholic. I don't officially speak for the Catholic Church. I'm a president of a college, but it's a moment in time by which I'm hopeful that true reconciliation can take place. But echoing Dr. Fraser's comments, I mean, that can't happen without truth telling, and that truth telling is still happening. It's been happening for a long time, but the society has been listening a little bit more now. And I think there was a moment in time when the bishops themselves really started to heed the issue more, and of course what's been in the news. And I think something's changed. Something is good, something is happening, but that doesn't mean it's not going to be difficult for people. That's either for some people who are denialists and don't want to talk about it. Those are settlers as well, Catholics, non-Catholics. For Indigenous peoples that are just not ready to have these conversations because of trauma. That has to be okay. But for others, that we need to continue this process. So I mean, it's a tough moment. It's not easy. Some people are really excited the Pope is coming, right? There's this, but the Pope is trying to teach Catholics, especially, why he's coming and why it's important. And it's not like other visits. This is a very unique visit.
Dr. Fraser, what do you hope comes out of this? What are you hoping to see?
I mean, I think there's a lot of hope around this visit. I mean, we could analyze every single detail down to audiences, why the Pope is coming, is he going to deliver the same apology, a different apology, and also in the realm of hopes. And so I think there are many different hopes for this visit. As somebody whose mother and grandmother were institutionalized at an Indian residential school, I've spent my career looking at histories of colonialism and genocide around residential schooling. My hope is that we are presented with an action plan by the Catholic Church. My hope is that this is not simply an opportunity for a visit, that it is not simply a photo op, that it is not simply a chance for the Catholic Church to assure Catholics that, there can still be goodness, that the Church is still relevant in the 21st century. I hope that we learn an action plan for how the Catholic Church is going to pay survivors the compensation that they owe them. Robust conversation around the doctrine of discovery. There are still artifacts at Vatican City and in oblate archives that need to be returned. There are still perpetrators who worked at Indian residential schools who may have been responsible for crimes. I believe that the Church knows where those individuals are located. They know their names, and are they finally willing to work with policing bodies on actual justice for these crimes? And so I think I agree with my colleague Shawn that this is a good thing, that it can really facilitate a lot of healing, but I also need to see action following up the apology.
Dr. Flynn, it's fair to say that Dr. Fraser is not alone in calling for justice or policing or what have you, like accountability from a justice standpoint. Do you believe that perpetrators, that alleged abusers that participated in those actions at residential schools should be held legally accountable present day? I mean,
that's pretty pointed question. I mean, of course. I mean, if someone does a crime, they should be held accountable, right? But I think there's a lot going on here. It's that so the Pope will visit and will provide a compass for how Catholic bishops in the future need to act, which they should have been acting like this a long time ago. I really believe there was a change in the Catholic bishops' orientation to this issue in their September apology, where they fully admitted to the mistakes that were made and the horrible legacy of residential schools in a way they as a joint group hadn't before. That's kind of the starting point. They've committed to another 30 million. The last round of commitments fell flat and they kind of escaped it. I think that they need to succeed in this $30 million pledge, and I know they have some good oversight, like Chief Wilton Littlechild and Graydon Nicholas are on that committee. So that's the funding portion. The aspect of justice that I think and concrete tangible actions we're talking about, there's a couple that could happen. So one is a increased expanded apology. So that has to happen on land. We have to remember that TRC 58, I believe it was written by survivors, and this is something that they wanted. So that has to happen, and that will happen finally. I mean, it took too long, but it's going to happen. And then we can talk about things like the doctrine of discovery or terra nullius. I mean, papal bulls by which the doctrine of discovery is rooted in are products of the 14th and 15th century. How we deal with them in modern day law, you can't ignore history, but how they're typically dealt with is just regulating them to history. But what Indigenous peoples are telling us is that things like these papal bulls and the doctrine of discovery, which now embedded in common law in North America, stand in the way of reconciliation. So what are creative ways that we can set relations in a new way? And I think we need to address that. And then the other concrete action is the return of artifacts. And I'll just share a bit of my learning as a settler. When I started to realize that Indigenous peoples understand artifacts as their relatives, then I started to understand what this means. So whether they were gifts given at an earlier time, and whether if Indigenous communities want these things, these relatives back, and that's a good way to understand it, that kind of shocks you to understanding what's going on here. This should be facilitated as well. Records, I mean, I think we're past the point now where passing the buck could happen. So you have bishops and you have religious orders and you have Rome. So all those groups have to work together and not say, well, it's the religious orders problem or it's Rome's problem. So it's a really hopeful possible moment. I'll share one metaphor that was used when the delegates heard the first apology in Rome. I believe it was a Dene chief. He said, it's like seeing moose tracks in the snow. So for anyone who's a hunter out there, you get it. It's a moment of hopeful expectation, but you know that there's a lot of damn hard work ahead, like a lot of work, back-breaking work. And those people who spend time in the woods know what we mean there. But that's we're hopeful, but we have to keep on this issue. And this has to occur after the Pope leaves. And that has to occur with local leaders, bishops, working with Indigenous communities closely. And if that's not going to happen afterwards, those concrete, tangible actions, the Pope has an opportunity to provide a really solid compass for how those things can go. And that's what I'm hoping for from this apology, is an apology with some compass of tangible actions that can be taken up later on.
Dr. Fraser, I can see you for people on the podcast. I want to let them know. I see you're nodding in agreement to some of the things that Shawn's saying. Do you believe that these? I mean, would these match what might be on your checklist of the next steps or of meaningful action toward true reconciliation? Is it on the right track?
Yeah, definitely on the track. I mean, I resonate with the moose print analogy. Anyone who has harvested large animals knows the backbreaking work that's involved there. And you're right. I mean, it's the same thing with reconciliation is that this is not something that naturally comes easy. You know, it is putting yourself and our society into a place of extreme discomfort. And one thing I always say to my students is that if you're comfortable, then you aren't learning. We need to push ourselves and think outside the boundaries here. And so I absolutely agree with all of that. I mean, I am still very much committed to truth and reconciliation. We still do not have a good understanding of the full histories and the full truths of these Indian residential schools, of what happened, of how they operated, of how many, unmarked graves they are, of how children passed away at these institutions. And so I think there are several working parts here. I think on the one hand, we definitely need to keep going in the reconciliation spirit. The Pope is there to provide a compass, of course, but I would also hope that there are meetings that are happening in the background with the bishops. I'm not an expert on the Catholic Church, but I would really hope that, if the leader or the boss is going to say that something is very important, that there will be follow-up on that. So on the one hand, forge ahead in reconciliation, and actually, get down to the crux of it. I am, these days slightly annoyed talking about renaming streets, or should the statue come down. I am interested in sovereignty. I am interested in Indigenous communities building nationhood. I'm interested in decolonization. I am interested in Canada and the Church being held accountable for genocide at an international court. So there is the reconciliation side. There's a lot we need to deal with, including white supremacy, which we haven't talked about here. But then, as an intergenerational survivor and a historian, there is still this truth-telling piece, that there is still a lot of work and a lot of research, a lot of ground-penetrating radar, a lot of oral histories, a lot of work with community that still needs to be done.
Yeah, I mean, Paul right now in our live chat is saying, I only heard of residential schools in 2005 as a 31-year-old university student. Other audience members are saying truth before reconciliation. Sharon Morin, who I had the pleasure of meeting at an event a short time ago, what a wonderful advocate Sharon is. She says we are still in the truth part. I mean, she's very clear about that. Let me circle back on that, because I want to ask you, Crystal, are you saying, with regards to, tearing down the Sir John A. Macdonald statue, or renaming there's certain places where everyone's focus went. Ryerson University changed its name, and other places are kind of hanging tight, I think, wanting to make sure, they're trying to keep their branding, and there is fierce debate about it, and then the politicians get involved and it gets supercharged, and we start talking about cancel culture, and then right? And some people have no time for that. Other people believe it to be very important, and that's fine. Their perspective's fine as well. Are you saying that you have no time for that discussion? You think it's irrelevant? Are you just saying we need to think more ambitiously? With regards to where you think Canadians are at, or where Canadians need to get pushed, I liked your take on discomfort. I mean, can you see political will? Can you see some of the bigger picture things you're talking about actually happening?
I love this conversation. Thank you for that question.
Yeah.
Just to be clear, yes, we should still be renaming streets. Yes, renaming universities, taking down statues. All of those things need to happen. What I'm saying is that settlers got that. There is enough educated people out there today who are committed to reconciliation, who are immersed in that, who are holding government accountable. I mean, look at the 94 calls to action. Canada was doing a terrible job at implementing those, maybe 7 or 8 or 9. Until, unmarked graves out of Kamloops 14 months ago. And we have come a little bit of a ways on the 94 calls to action since then. So what I'm saying is that there is a whole body of people who have political will, who can hold folks accountable in order to get, the naming issue done, in order to do that kind of work. But when we have brilliant Indigenous minds out there who are in academia, who are in government, who are watchdogs, who are in community, we need to be thinking about the bigger picture things, like sovereignty, like getting rid of the Indian Act, like how it is that we can replace colonial policing bodies like the RCMP with our own people. We need to be thinking about building capacity. And so I do think that, the conversations that really have been happening since Canada 150, since 2017, those need to continue on, but we need to be redirecting our labor and our efforts a little bit in order to look at the bigger picture stuff if we actually want a decolonial, transformative society.
Dr. Flynn, Shawn, I've noticed a couple things. I checked out your Twitter profile before we spoke, and I noticed that you identify. I mean, you're there. You're the president of St. Joseph's College. It's clear you're a man of faith. You're you won't want me to say a religious leader, but you're affiliated with the Catholic Church. Yet, at the same time, you identify your location on your Twitter profile as Gwichya Gwich'in, which is what territory now known as Edmonton was formerly known as, and you're invoking words like settler. And you're talking about returning artifacts. And it's just, I've spoken a lot with representatives from different archdioceses. I've spoken with religious leaders over many years in interviews. And it's kind of rare. It's kind of rare to have somebody in your position affiliated with the Catholic Church using some of the language you do. I'm asking you a personal question. Has this been part of your personal journey? It's obviously intentional. Like, how does this resonate with you as a human being?
Sure. No, thanks for the question. Don't mind personal questions. It's the heart of the matter that I think we have to get at. So how do I answer this the best way I can? I've learned a lot by listening. I'm blessed to be at the University of Alberta, which has the largest faculty of Native Studies in North America. So just listening to lectures, listening to colleagues, listening to people. And that's where we get to what Dr. Fraser says about seeking truth. This is a Catholic, it's a deeply Catholic concept that's embedded in our intellectual tradition and the origins of university, and seeking truth no matter how uncomfortable it makes you. And the Catholic Church has had great success with being uncomfortable with truth at times in its history, but also pushing it scientifically. And so it's a deeply embedded Catholic reality for me to seek truth, because I believe that's where good relations occur. Personally, I mean, I grew up in northern BC in Prince George, British Columbia. I witnessed Indigenous racism that occurred. We have the Highway of Tears, Highway 16, where Indigenous women would go missing. I worked at a kids' camp that was next to a reserve in Fort St. James, and saw many of the Indigenous kids that came to camp suffering what now I understand as intergenerational trauma, which I didn't get at the time. I would canoe over to Mass, and the Indigenous women would sing Marian songs in Cree. But this is just a small piece of my journey, in which now I'm in this moment where there's a lot of pain out there. There's a lot of pain and a lot of hurt, and a lot of discomfort with truth. And I want to make a point that it's not just it's not an Indigenous issue. These are colonial issues that create bad relations. Right. So part of my learning is to understand that yes, the Catholic Church has to take specific responsibility for what has been done and the reconciliation that needs to take place. But the next 15 to 50 years, the challenge will be regular Edmontonians, regular Albertans realizing that this is their responsibility as well. That's the length of the conversation that I'm a little bit worried about, because the average person, it's not my problem. I moved here, or my parents grew up here, or whatever. My parents are from Newfoundland. It's not my issue, but it's something we all share through the colonial structures we inhabit. Now, I exist on Treaty 6 territory. I lived in Vancouver. That's unceded territory of the Musqueam Nation. So these are the different types of relationships. So how they navigate those things in unceded Musqueam territory might be different than a treaty structure that we start with here. So these things, and when Dr. Fraser talks about self-determination and Indigenous peoples having the freedom to self-determine their own governance in their own way and lead reconciliation, these are things that I've been learning. What I can do about it in my own position, I don't quite know. I don't, it's not like a checklist where you're like, oh great, we did this. I have this statement in my email, I'm good to go. It's about creating relation. And I'm slowly doing that in my own personal life. Sometimes I succeed and sometimes I fail. Sometimes I say the wrong thing. Sometimes I ask my Indigenous colleagues for stuff and they're just too tired and too worn out to even respond, but that has to be okay. That doesn't mean me as a settler shouldn't talk about it. My kids go to the Catholic system and K to 12, and they're talking about these things in school. What are these conversations like around the average Edmontonian dinner table with the family? These are where these things will start to occur. Yes, popes can come and bishops can talk and lawyers can get involved, but I'm more concerned about, I think the sustainability of reconciliation will come at the heart on one-to-one relations. And that's going to be hard. It's going to take a lot of work because we're going to have to hear that there's embedded racism in our society. And it's not just the Catholic Church's fault or the government's fault, or it's something we live with. So how do we deal with that? How do we deal with that in education systems? U of A has a great new strategic plan for Indigenous relationships. And how will organizations not just have these as pieces of paper, but ways that can truly change things? A little bit of rambling, but I hope that gives you a sense of that answer.
It's not rambling. It's like a flow of consciousness. It's a flow of thought. You're exploring an idea, and that's literally the whole point of these roundtables. And I appreciate your perspective that you bring to this. Crystal, Dr. Fraser, you teed this up a few minutes ago, and you said we haven't chatted this morning about white supremacy, but, and then you kind of went on to another thought. And we promise our audience, we say that we'll make ourselves uncomfortable, show up and have the conversations that have to happen. So let's talk about white supremacy. How does that integrate into this? I mean, I don't mean it as an ignorant question. Where do we start that conversation in relation to the context that we're talking about today?
Yeah, I mean, white supremacy is all around us. And I mean, we know today that Indigenous and other racialized people in Canada are victims of systemic racism. And we see that really across the board. I mean, we have seen that in policing, we have seen that in healthcare, we have seen that in the justice system. And so what it is this idea that, that certain people are privileged in the system, but the outcomes for the unprivileged can be very, very dire, including death. We know people like Brian Sinclair in Winnipeg, this was about 10 years ago now, but who died of a bladder infection in the emergency room because people assumed that he was intoxicated. We have folks like, Gerald Stanley, who was acquitted for the killing of Colton Boushie, who admitted to pulling the trigger on that weapon. And so, I mean, in a way, yes, we have inherited these systems of governance. We have inherited these systems of justice. But I also think that we need to rally around creating a system that works for everyone. We need to rally around creating forms of governance that are anti-colonial. And I mean, my visions of having sovereign Indigenous nations with no Indian Act, with traditional forms of justice, with their own governing bodies and structures. All of those dreams and visions for me are very true. Do I expect to see them happening, in the coming decades? Probably not. But, until we can actually get to a fully decolonial point, it is still our responsibility to hold Canada accountable in order to make the system and the governments work better for everyone. And so when we talk about white supremacy, I mean, I think we can talk about it at a structural level. I think we can talk about it in an everyday level. Dr. Flynn and I know for sure that it is in academia. It is a part of whose research is highlighted, of who gets what grant, of who is treated, in a good way, of what students succeed in what courses. I mean, it is basically this underlying force in society. And when these conversations were starting a few years ago, a lot of white people came out and said, well, I don't understand, because I grew up very, very poor, or myself, I have been homeless, or I have faced adversity. And I think that when we look at it in a structural level, it becomes quite obvious. And it doesn't necessarily always have to do with racialized backgrounds or the color of your skin either. For instance, in my case, even though I am Gwichya Gwich'in, also of English and Scottish ancestry. There are places in my life where I benefit from white privilege. And so I am white passing, and that gives me a certain amount of credibility and safety that it is just not there for other Indigenous folks. And so I think if we can normalize these conversations, if we can make it less about hurting our own feelings and more about like, how can we talk about this in terms of reconciliation? How can we acknowledge our privilege? I think if we can have these little conversations as a starting point, then that will be the way to really try and break down the big systemic barriers.
I love what you're saying. And to me, it's so important for people to be there. Like, just to state the obvious, we always say real talk, the real talk. And you're addressing this, Crystal, in your comment, is that there are many people, all of us, maybe not all of us, but most of us will have someone in our life, somebody probably close to us, that when they hear something like white privilege, they'll just roll their eyes and the conversation ends for them. They'll say, I'm a survivor, and I'm not negating their experience. I'm not negating their trauma. I'm not diminishing it. But like you said, someone will say, I experienced hardship. We didn't have milk for cereal when I was a kid. I was sexually abused when I was young. I experienced this. I experienced that. I'm not the one that ran the residential school. My parents aren't the ones that ran the residential school. My hope is just that with people like the two of you and Dr. Wildcat, who joined us earlier this morning, and journalist Brandy Morin, and the Grand Chief and Chief that joined us earlier this week, people that are willing to show up and just speak plainly and talk about their personal experience. There's the steps of the 7 steps of highly effective people. It has nothing to do with truth and reconciliation, but that idea of seeking to understand just as compassionate or empathetic or decent humans. How can we not seek to understand the experiences of other people, including this, not just the survivors, the intergenerational survivors? How can we look around us? I mean, this is just my real gut conviction. How can we take a look at some of the systemic issues in Canada and not acknowledge that they are still issues, and they're not, not to take away from what's happened in turning the tide around public sentiment since the discovery of the 215 unmarked graves in Kamloops. I think that was a turning point, and obviously thousands have been rediscovered since, but we're not even really, generally speaking, as a nation or as people here, trending in the right direction. And my hope is that, I acknowledge, and again, people will say, why the fuck does your perspective matter? And maybe it doesn't in this, because I'm not directly involved, and I want to listen to other perspectives, but my hope is that while the visit, the apology from the Pope is polarizing, it's wonderful for some, it's very traumatic and troubling for others. While some people, the truth and reconciliation recommendations make some people feel inspired and hopeful, make other people feel uncomfortable or upset, I hope that generally speaking, there will be something that burns within each one of us that sort of sets the table for this openness, that we're willing to consider some of the bigger steps that need to be taken. And so the next generation or the generation after that doesn't look back at us and say, you solicited the testimony from hundreds or thousands of people who willingly, if I can put it this way respectfully, re-traumatized themselves to dig deep and tell their stories. And what did you do with that knowledge? What did you do with that information? It's kind of like, I don't mean to muddy the waters here, but it's kind of like climate change, really. We have this generation that's going to look at us and say, you knew, what did you do about it?
Well, and if I can jump in there for a minute, we have known for decades. This is the thing, is that like my generation is already saying, you knew, like our people have been telling you about their missing relatives at Indian residential schools for decades. And you had mentioned that the news story out of Kamloops was a turning point. And I definitely agree. I have been calling it, we're in this next era of reconciliation. But I also make the point that the only reason why our knowledge, our experiences, our stories are true is because Western science now says so. We had the ground penetrating radar to bring, quote unquote, proof to these experiences, to these deaths, to this trauma. And once you start to, no pun intended, once you start to dig around in ground penetrating radar, it is not as authoritative or scientific or wholesome, as we would like to think. but our communities have been saying this for decades, and so on the one hand, I'm very grateful that this knowledge is now out there, that people are listening. For the most part, I mean, I still get emails every day from residential school deniers that we are liars, that we are making this stuff up. So I'm hopeful, but my interjection was to make the point that we've known for a long time. Mm-hmm.
I'm almost convinced we need to call it the interjection roundtable, because that's what we're all about. We want our panelists jumping in and saying what they think. So I'm really grateful for that. I respect both of your time. I want to acknowledge we're past the time that we've asked you to stay. So let me just ask you this in closing. Obviously, the conversation will continue. The conversation arguably is just starting with the Pope's visit with regards to what next steps are and moving forward, not forgetting the past, but moving forward in a sense that acknowledges what needs to be acknowledged. Let me ask you to give each of us, let me use some religious, some ceremonial language here, Shawn, a charge for the audience, if you will. What's something that you'd like people to walk with? And then, Crystal, I'll ask you the same question. Something you want people to think about, to consider, to walk with over the weekend and moving forward.
Well, I would say to my fellow Catholics, if you're a religious person, pray. Think about this on your heart and think what you can concretely do in your own life. You might feel that you can't affect any change in this area, but think about it and think of the ways. There's so many practical ways in Edmonton, whether it's going to the Indigenous Peoples Experience at Fort Edmonton Park, or it's taking a course through the University of Alberta, or it's volunteering or donating to the Bent Arrow Society or organizations like there's so many concrete things we can do in Edmonton, for example. So that would be concrete action as much as you're able to affect that change, to realize that this is not just, this is not an Indigenous issue. These are colonial issues that have been caused, and to do what you are able. And then I would just say, try to change your heart on the issue if you feel this is not your problem or not your issue. And that should take a lot of work. And I think that I truly believe that I should be talking to my kids about this, and my kids should be taking up reconciliation as well. My kids are, the oldest is 16, the youngest 6. So that's how I'm understanding it. And I would hope other people would. It's not this issue that the Pope's visit will give a lot of attention to this important discussion, but we need to carry it on together after the Pope leaves.
Dr. Fraser, last word to you.
Thanks. I mean, I would say for my Indigenous relatives and friends and colleagues, this is definitely a time to look after yourself. Not everyone is going to be ready for this, and this visit is not welcomed by everyone. And so do what you need to do to be okay. There is still a lot of grief and trauma from residential schools and from other forms of colonial violence. And if that means not going, not engaging, then that is perfectly fine. If it means, engaging full stop, being there for every moment, I think that's great also. If you are a settler, please, there are so many ways you can educate yourself now. 94 calls to action. I am the co-author of 150 acts of reconciliation, which will bring reconciliation into your everyday lives. There is the U of A Indigenous Canada MOOC, which thousands of people sign up for every single week. But additionally, if you're traveling to Lac St. Anne, if you are going to Maskwacis, please clean up after yourself. Please be respectful. Please understand that these are not normally high traffic areas for settlers, that we have a relationship with the land. Somebody talked about Wakotowin, about being in relation. I think a lot of deep thinking should go into that around the actions of next week. Thank you.
Really remarkable perspectives from both of you, and I'm so grateful and appreciative for your time. I know that this podcast is going to be really important for a lot of people to hear. I suspect that some may be listening to it in transit on their way to some of these events. We've been hearing from the president of St. Joseph's College, that's Dr. Shawn Flynn, and a professor in the Faculty of Native Studies, the Department of History, Classics, and Religion at the U of A, Also a member of the 7-member governing circle guiding the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation. That's Dr. Crystal Gail Fraser. My gratitude to you both. And we invite you, Real Talkers, to be in touch with us, to talk at ryanjesperson.com. Let us know how this is resonating with you. We truly want to integrate your perspectives into what we present every day, regardless of where you're coming from. We want to better understand this audience and how these conversations are landing with you. And thank you, TS, in the live chat, reminding everybody who's checking us out on YouTube to smash that like button. Just to be technical and a little bit nerdy for a second, the more that you share our content, the more that you comment on it, that you like it, the more that you subscribe and tell your friends to do the same, the bigger the spread of these conversations. They'll be amplified by these algorithms and more people will hear them. And I have great conviction as I'm moving and talking with my hands that these are conversations that people need to hear. So our thanks to everybody that supports Real Talk in whichever way you do it. That can include signing up for our Patreon. It can include subscribing to our free Sunday message. That's the email that I send out late Sunday night. You can do it by scrolling to the bottom of the page on our website, ryanjesperson.com. Such important conversations. If you're just catching us today because you heard that maybe Dr. Wildcat was on or Drs. Fraser, Dr. Flynn, want to remind you also through this past week, we've spoken with journalist Brandy Morin. We've spoken with Grand Chief George Archon Jr. from the Confederacy of Treaty 6 and Chief Tony Alexis from the Nakota Alexis First Nation. So great conversations, well worth visiting our archives on the podcast and, of course, on YouTube as well. Nice and convenient for you.
Go back and check them out. And you know what I'm most excited for? These two. Having them in a room together. And like people know, we're moving into a new studio at the end of the summer. And I liked how Crystal said, we have to get uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Getting people in a room and getting them face to face, that would have been 10 times. I mean, it was incredible having them talk together, but having them in a room together will be even better in a few months.
I really like this comment. I want to scroll back and find this. Brenda says, for example, thank you to this panel. We all should feel it and have an open mind to listen and to ponder and to grieve. And I like this from Cheryl as well, who said, Indigenous people don't need us. Cheryl, I'm assuming, is not Indigenous. She says, people don't need us to work together with them to collaborate for solutions. We failed miserably at that. They need us to make space for them to self-govern and heal. I think that's a great insight from Cheryl as well. Sure appreciate your comments online. Of course, all of these, once the podcast blasts out and then we go to work on our social media channels. Did you know you can follow Real Talk now on TikTok, on Instagram? You can follow us on Twitter, of course, all at Real Talk RJ. We're still working on Facebook. We're going to get Facebook going one of these days, John.
They've got us in Facebook jail.
We're in Facebook for the Catholic reference. We are in Facebook purgatory right now. We don't know why, but our page. Anyway, I digress. Nobody cares about that, but we'll let you know when it's launched. Last night, Carrie, my wife, is out. She's running errands. She had some time away from baby. I was able to take little Noah at 5 weeks old, and Dad was looking after him. So every time she's texting me, "How's everything going?" I said, "It's totally under control. It's totally under control, babe." Anyway, she gets home late, and I had promised her I was going to make a dinner, and I had a plan in place. And let me tell you about this recipe for success from Friesen Brothers. Ooh. Last time I was there, I was checking out the butchers are kind of taking nothing away from the bakers and taking nothing away from the produce department and everybody else. But the butchers have always been, for more than 65 years, the stars of the show at Friesen Brothers. They have these pre-made meatballs, John. They come in a vacuum-sealed pack. They're seasoned already and they're frozen. I thought, I think I might take these for a spin. So I threw them in the freezer, just waiting for when I might need them. Last night, Carrie comes home a little bit late. I said, I better whip something up in a hurry. Mm-hmm. So I thawed those meatballs ahead of time. I pan-fried them with a little bit I was caramelizing the onions. I threw some yellow bell peppers in there. Nice and simple. Took 5 minutes to prep. Less than 5 minutes.
Nice. While holding a baby.
Well, no, I had the baby in the baby was in bed. The baby was in the bassinet. Okay. Like, we're talking 10:30 at night. This was a late carbo load.
The Midnight Chef.
The Midnight Chef. And who can't prepare spaghetti noodles? No big deal. I went with a classic spaghetti sauce. The next thing you knew, spaghetti and meatballs, comfort food, grated a little Parmesan cheese on top, and a bada bing, bada boom. A fabulous meal. I wanted to share it all with you.
Straight from Friesen, bro.
Specifically look I want you to specifically look for those meatballs next time you're at the 16 Friesen Brothers locations across the province.
Well, I won't, but I'll share my meal last night, too, from Friesen Bros as well. A birthday meal. You know, I asked my wife to cook me a lasagna. She was tired. You know what I said? I'll just stop at Friesen Bros. On the way home, got a plant-based lasagna.
What?
Threw it in the oven, 45 minutes. Also got, look at this.
Vegan jerky.
It exists. All of this from the plant-based section at your local Friesen Bros. Now, the official grocer of the Hicks family.
You're just trying to get in on the action. I love it. They're going to love this from you, John. Hey, let me tell you about our friends at St. Albert and Sherwood Dodge. Weekends are big for them for obvious reasons. They've got all hands on deck as they prepare. People are coming from across the province. They tell us people are coming in from BC and Saskatchewan to see their inventory of not just the Ram trucks, but the Jeep lineup as well, including that Jeep Grand Wagoneer that everybody's buzzing about. This is Jeep's re-entry into the full-size luxury class SUVs. Everybody's got the Navigators and the Escalades. The Grand Wagoneer delivers with that classic Jeep brand, the trustworthiness that people certainly have made Jeep. I mean, if you look at it, do you know that Jeep is the Grand Cherokee, the best-selling SUV in North American history? By a mile. You won't find a better selection than you will at St. Albert and Sherwood Dodge. Made a connection yesterday, which I was telling you about. I love this. The teams at Urban Timber and Eden Landscaping, we've just learned, are talking, which means there may be, I don't know if there's going to be integration happening here. I don't know if people are all of a sudden going to start going with this historic wood installed into their outdoor kitchens that Mike and the Eden Landscaping teams are building. But this is really exciting. I mean, Real Talk's bringing people together. There's collabs happening from people meeting here on the show. Eden Landscaping, for more than 20 years, has been bringing outdoor spaces to life. You may have something small. We need a retaining wall fixed, or we got to fix this drainage issue. Maybe you need a new fence. Whatever. They've done it all. Or maybe it's something huge. Like maybe you're going, we want excavation and water features, and we want to do something that really sets our place apart. They can dream with you. They can take your dream and turn it into reality. Check them out today. Contact them at landscapeedmonton.ca. And we can't tell you any bigger news. I mean, we can't make a bigger endorsement, if you will, from our family to yours than what we feed our dogs, right? I'm not saying, hey, you can go get this kibble wherever at this store in the back shelf in the back of the room that's been sitting there for 6 months. Our dogs are eating quality raw food from Grand Dog Essentials. The best part about it, one of the best parts about it, it's delivered to our door every single week. If you live in Calgary, Edmonton, Central Alberta, a minimum order of $50 means they'll drop it off at your door too. You can learn more about why you might want to feed your dogs and even your cats raw food at granddog.ca. Check out the blog link. Don't forget the promo code REALTALK gets you 10% off your first time order. All right, there's a lot going on in the world around us. Next week's shows are pedal to the metal. We're going to be talking about Hockey Canada. We'll probably be talking about allegations facing the Edmonton Oilers owner Daryl Cates when Ken Campbell joins us, one of Canada's most well-known hockey writers with Hockey Unfiltered. We'll be talking more political trends. We're going to welcome back Charles Adler on Monday. Can't wait for him to chime in on what's going on around us. And, of course, other news as it develops. You know, we're getting to the point of this show where we wrap for the week, and we do so with tradition, courtesy of our friends at Local Environmental Services. You can check them out online at localenviro.ca. What is this for people watching on YouTube? A new graphic board? Look at this. This is pro John Hicks. Unbelievable job. Of course, you know it's time to buckle up, baby, because it's time for Trash Talk. Yeah, that's right. These are real emails sent to talk at ryanjesperson.com. This one from Devin. Devin says, I stand at the kitchen sink washing dishes with regular diligence, focused on getting all the nooks and crannies clean, not leaving any smudges or residue behind. The sun is shining, the birds are singing and chirping, whipping around in the lushness of the green trees. All is good in this part of the world, yet here I stand with a pall of gloom and melancholy hanging over me. TLDR, NSFW. Earmuffs, kids. Here it comes. Devin says, fucking dishwasher. Why do you suck so bad? We bought you from a good store with good name brands. You come from excellent lineage, so why can't you just wash my fucking dishes? If I don't miss everything, if I don't rinse it off before I put the dishes on the racks, what, you just leave half of it behind? It's not like I overwork you. All you get is ceramics, glass, and cutlery. Heaven forbid I put some Rubbermaids in there. You just flip them over and fill them with water. Have you seen how hard the restaurant dishwashers work? They go all day, late into the night. Everything they get comes out hot, sparkling, and clean, and you don't hear them bitching about it. Why? Because they care. Maybe you should take some notes from them and try putting some pride into your work. Or maybe it's time you pack your shit and get out of here. Balls in your court, dishwasher. I'm leaving it up to you to decide. Devin says, that feels a little bit better. Nice. Devin wrote that to us at 11:34 p.m. on Monday, washing dishes. How about this one from Cheryl? Says, Jesperson, I've been lightly following your commentary on Edmonton's so-called mosquito problem. To be honest, I'm a little surprised. I found you take an unbiased approach to truth-seeking and fact-finding, but your position on mosquitoes strikes me as an emotional reaction to a personal inconvenience. Yeah. She says, is it an overreaction? I don't know. I just got back from 5 days in the backcountry, hiking through mosquito-infested trails. They're annoying, but are they bad? She says, now I don't know a lot about insects or pesticides, so when a colleague with more letters behind their name than mine invited me to learn more, Ryan, I turned to the city council meeting where Edmonton's aerial mosquito program had been debated, and I learned a lot. Experts spoke eloquently with facts and research that made sense, citing statistics of how many other cities in Canada refuse to have those aerial pesticide programs because it's so toxic. She says, imagine my surprise when I saw the headlines in the newspaper that week. Ridiculous commentary that colored the facts into biased rhetoric. Even more surprising, how many of the public was eating it up as fact. She said, this wasn't rebel media. We're smart. We're not going to be pulled into inflammatory clickbait, right? Wrong. She says, all I have to say, Jesperson, you have a powerful platform, and we live in a time where platforms like yours, reasonable and reflective, can raise important awareness on how we make choices that look beyond our own human interests. We need platforms that challenge us to live beyond ourselves, to live outside our comfort zones. Let's be honest. What we're doing on this planet so far, it's not working. So, if you'd like to read some of the materials I read, if you'd like to hear that presentation from City Council, I can send you the links. Keep doing good work to make this world a better place. That from Cheryl, who cares about things like data and facts and evidence. How about this from FX, who wrote into the show? Ken FX says, Jesperson, this is the first time I've ever heard of you, first time I've ever heard of your show, and I'm so disappointed at how biased you are. What was your agenda going into your interview with Danielle Smith? What about being neutral and listening without fear? You know how many people listen to neutral talk shows, John? Exactly zero. He says, it's pretty low on your part to end the interview and then criticize Danielle while she's not there to defend herself. Why don't you get your hero, Theron Fleury, on your show and find out why he thinks the way he does? I know why he thinks the way he does, because he got hit in the head too many times. He says, and if you have an open mind, no preconceived notions, and are curious in nature, you might learn a thing or two. Are you not curious, wonders Ken? He says, I can go on and on and on, but then you'll just think I'm a conspiracy theorist. The problem right now is that the mainstream media has been bought off, paid extra money during COVID to be the government's propaganda arm. Ken, you don't sound like a conspiracy theorist at all. He says, Ryan, once you know that the mainstream media is biased, then you'll start to figure it out. Do some homework. Do some research. Hopefully you can step back and think critically instead of following the herd. That from Ken with a bad take. And finally, this from Kathy, who says, Jesperson, the reality of these so-called freedom protest movements, the convoy needs to be reframed, and it's up to you to take the lead. I'm sure as a journalist, you understand the power that words have, especially during chaotic times. And I submit that using the term freedom in connection with the Ottawa occupation serves to reinforce the misconceptions that this radical movement is about protecting democracy. At its root, it is an anti-democratic movement and a threat to Canadian politics as we know it. The word freedom conjures up images of outstanding individuals. Martin Luther King Jr., Nelson Mandela, Gandhi, though I've learned a lot of bad shit about Gandhi. Anyway, I digress. The famous five and every single human who ever fought and died to protect democracy. Imagine trying to explain a freedom movement that proudly touts swastikas, Confederate flags, diagolon flags, and other hate symbols as bystanders are harassed, bullied, gridlocked for weeks. publicly associating the word freedom with the likes of Tamara Litch and Christopher Barber and all these other clowns plants psychological seeds that fuels the fire of chaos and division that could damage this country irreparably. Says Kathy, we're living in sad and scary times, and I challenge you to be a source of hope. And if you can't do that, at least stop doing further harm. I love it from Kathy. You can send us your trash talk to talk@ryanjesperson.com. We're open online 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. My friends, as mentioned, Ken Campbell coming up on Monday, Charles Adler coming up on Monday, and we've got a great lineup through next week. You can learn all about it Sunday night when you get our email. Subscribe for free on our website, ryanjesperson.com. John, have an amazing birthday weekend.
Thank
Real
you.
Talkers, stay safe out there, and we'll talk to you live Monday morning.